Here is something I want you to sit with for a second. Think about the last time you got into an argument, whether it was online, at work, or with someone close to you. Now think about how much energy you poured into that moment, explaining yourself, defending your point, going over and over it in your head long after it was done. And then ask yourself honestly, did any of that actually change anything? Most of the time, the answer is no. And yet, we keep doing it. We keep spending enormous amounts of mental energy trying to make the world understand us, validate us, agree with us. And the exhausting truth is that the more we chase that recognition, the more worn out we feel. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in the history of psychology, spent his entire career asking why. Why do human beings pour so much of themselves into the outside world, into other people's opinions, into social appearances, into proving themselves, and yet still feel so empty inside? His answer was not what most people expect. And today, we are going to break it down, step by step. Because according to Jung, the moment you stop fighting for the world's attention and turn that energy back toward yourself, something almost magical begins to happen. Life starts to realign. The right things begin to fall into place. And for the first time in a long time, let's get into it. There is a version of you that most people know, and then there is the real you. The version most people know is polished. It responds the right way. It says the right things. It performs confidence even when it's crumbling inside. It laughs at the right moments and stays serious when the situation calls for it. It manages impressions the way a publicist manages a celebrity's image. Carefully, constantly, exhaustingly. Carl Jung had a name for this version of us. He called it the persona, and the word itself comes from the Latin term for the masks that ancient Greek actors wore on stage. Jung chose that word on purpose because he believed that most of us are performing all day, every day, without even realizing it. Now, the persona is not a bad thing by itself. Jung was clear about that. Every human being needs a social mask to function. You talk to your boss differently than you talk to your best friend. You behave differently in a job interview than you do in your own living room on a Saturday night. That flexibility is healthy. That's just how social life works. The problem comes when the mask gets too tight. When the mask gets too tight, you start to forget what your real face looks like underneath it. And when that happens, life becomes a performance. Every interaction becomes a scene. Every conversation becomes a test of whether your image is holding up, and the energy it takes to maintain that image. The constant monitoring, the second guessing, the people pleasing. It drains you in ways that are hard to even put into words. Here's a scenario most of us recognize. You post something online, a thought, an opinion, maybe just a picture, and immediately after you hit send, the anxiety kicks in. You start refreshing, checking for likes, checking for comments, and the moment someone pushes back or disagrees, you feel this urgency to explain yourself, to clarify, to make sure they understand that you are reasonable, intelligent, and worth respecting. But here's the interesting thing. A lot of the time, you don't actually care that much about the original topic anymore. What you're really protecting is your image. What you're really afraid of is how you look in someone else's eyes. That's the persona running the show. And Jung said something that cuts right to the heart of it. He wrote that the persona is what a person appears to be, not what they actually are. And the tricky part is that over time, even we start to believe our own performance. So what does silence have to do with any of this? Everything. When you choose to not respond right away, when you pause before explaining yourself, when you let a moment pass without defending yourself, you temporarily step off the stage. And in that quiet space, something interesting happens. You realize that a huge portion of the stress you feel every day was never coming from the world itself. It was coming from the effort of maintaining the act. There are people in every workplace, in every social circle, who talk constantly, who feel that if they go quiet for even a moment, everyone will assume they have nothing to offer. But if you look closely at the people who carry genuine influence, not performed confidence but real inner authority, they tend to be quieter. They listen more. They observe more. And when they do speak, people actually pay attention because their words are not reactions. They are reflections. Silence does not make you look weak. In the right hands, silence is one of the most powerful things you can wield. And most importantly, silence is the first step toward getting back in touch with who you actually are beneath all the performing. Now here's the part that most people don't want to hear. When the noise of daily life finally goes quiet, something comes up to fill the space. And it isn't always comfortable. Think about the last time you were completely alone, in a truly silent room, with no phone, no TV, no music. If you've ever experienced that kind of stillness, you probably know what happens after a few minutes. Thoughts start to surface. Old memories, uncomfortable feelings, questions you've been avoiding, a creeping sense of unease that you can't quite name. And the natural instinct is to grab the phone and scroll, to turn on something in the background, to manufacture noise just to drown it out. Carl Jung would tell you that the thing coming up in the silence is not your enemy. It is a part of you that has been waiting, patiently, persistently, to be acknowledged. He called it the shadow. The shadow is everything inside us that we have pushed out of conscious awareness. The emotions we were taught to hide. The qualities we were told were unacceptable. The fears, the jealousy, the anger, the grief. Anything that didn't fit the version of ourselves we wanted to present to the world. Anything that felt too messy or too dark to look at directly when we were growing up. Most of us were taught, directly or indirectly, that there were acceptable emotions and unacceptable ones. Be happy. Be kind. Don't be too angry. Don't be too sad. Don't be needy. Don't be greedy. And so we learned to take the unacceptable parts and stuff them somewhere out of sight. We became good at appearing one way while feeling another. But here's the catch. Those stuffed emotions don't disappear. They just go underground. They become part of the shadow, and from down there, in the dark, they keep shaping our behavior in ways we don't fully understand. You've probably seen this play out before. Someone who is relentlessly positive, always smiling, always kind, never seems to get upset. And then one day, they absolutely explode over something that seems completely minor. That's the shadow. Those emotions didn't vanish. They just accumulated until the pressure was too much to contain. Or think about the person who constantly judges other people for being lazy, or vain, or selfish. Jung would point out that intense, disproportionate judgment of others is often a signal. We tend to be most reactive to the qualities in others that we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The shadow doesn't stay quiet forever. When we don't choose to face it, it finds ways to surface on its own. In our reactions, in our patterns, in the relationships that keep breaking down the same way over and over again. And this is where silence becomes something more than just a break from the noise. Silence is the only environment in which the shadow can be seen. When you're constantly busy, constantly reacting, constantly performing, constantly filling every quiet moment with some kind of stimulation, you never have to look at what's underneath. But when you sit still long enough, the shadow comes forward, and that can feel terrifying at first. But Jung believed that this was one of the most important things a human being could do. Because here's the paradox. The shadow only has power over you when it's hidden. The moment you turn toward it, the moment you say, "Okay, I see you. I know you're there. I understand why you exist," it starts to lose its grip. A person who knows their own darkness is far less likely to be controlled by it. A person who has looked at their own fear, their own resentment, their own insecurity, not to wallow in it, but to understand it, that person carries a kind of psychological freedom that is very hard to shake. Jung once wrote that we don't become whole by imagining only the light in ourselves, but by bringing the darkness into conscious awareness. That's the work of silence. Not meditation in the sense of clearing your mind, but the courage to sit still long enough to hear what your own mind has actually been trying to say. And when you do that work, When you stop running from yourself, you'll likely discover something surprising. The darkness you were afraid to look at. A lot of it is just pain that needed to be understood. Just old feelings that needed to be named. Just parts of you that were waiting not to be feared, but to be welcomed home. Let's talk about exhaustion for a minute. Real, bone-deep exhaustion. The kind that a good night's sleep doesn't fix. The kind that makes you wonder why you feel so drained even on days when you didn't do that much. Here's a question worth sitting with. How many people are living rent-free in your head right now? How much mental real estate are you handing over to managing other people's emotions? Worrying about how someone interpreted what you said? Trying to figure out how to keep the peace between two people who are both annoyed at you? Feeling responsible for someone else's mood, someone else's problem, someone else's life? Jung had a concept for the force that drives human beings. He called it psychic energy, or libido. And he meant something much broader than the way that word is usually used. He meant the total life energy inside a person, the force behind thought, creativity, action, and growth. And he observed something crucial. That energy functions like water. When water is channeled into one strong current, it becomes powerful. It can carve through rock, but when it gets split into dozens of tiny streams, flowing in every direction at once, it loses all its force. It just spreads out and soaks into the ground. Most people's psychic energy is being split into dozens of tiny streams. We are constantly reacting, constantly monitoring, constantly giving away pieces of our attention to things that were never really ours to carry. And by the end of the day, there is almost nothing left for the things that actually matter to us. Here is a story that illustrates this perfectly. Imagine a woman who is known in her social circle as the person everyone goes to. If two friends have a fight, she's the one who mediates. If someone is going through a rough time, she's the first call they make. If a family member needs advice, she shows up. She is generous with her time, generous with her emotional energy, and genuinely cares about the people around her. But she's exhausted in a way she can't explain. One day, someone asks her a simple question. How are you doing? And she realizes she doesn't know. She can describe the emotional state of every person in her life with precision. But when it comes to her own inner experience, she draws a complete blank. Her energy had been flowing outward for so long, she had lost touch with her own center. This is more common than most people realize. And the fix is not to become cold or cut everyone off. It's something subtler. It's learning to check in with yourself before automatically giving. It's pausing before every demand and asking honestly, do I actually have the capacity for this right now? Those small pauses might seem insignificant, but over time, they act like little dams, slowly redirecting that energy back toward the source. Jung made an observation that has a lot of layers to it. He said that one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry is the unlived life of someone else. He was talking primarily about parents and children. The way children sometimes feel unconsciously obligated to carry out the dreams or the unresolved pain of their parents. But the idea extends much further. Anytime we take on someone else's emotional work, their expectations, their unprocessed feelings, their anxiety about their own choices, we are living their unlived life. And that is energy that belongs to them, not to us. When you start to set those things down, not cruelly, not dramatically, just gently returning what isn't yours, something happens. A kind of lightness comes back, a stillness, and in that stillness, you start to think more clearly, feel more grounded, and make decisions from a place of actual clarity instead of reactive exhaustion. The people in your life may even notice the shift before you do, not because you say or do anything differently at first, but because your presence changes. There is something about a person who has reclaimed their center, a quiet stability, a groundedness that other people can feel. It's not loud. It doesn't need to announce itself, but it is unmistakably real. And from that center, you can still give. You can still be there for the people you love. But the difference is enormous. You're giving from a place of genuine fullness instead of bleeding yourself dry and calling it kindness. So far, we have talked about what silence frees you from, the exhausting performance of the persona, the tyranny of the unexamined shadow, the draining pull of other people's demands. But there is something on the other side of all that release, something that silence opens you toward. Carl Jung believed that every human being has access to a depth within themselves that most people never reach. Not because it is difficult to get to, but because the path to it requires one thing that most modern lives are designed to prevent: stillness. In his framework, the process of becoming fully yourself, what he called individuation, is essentially the process of moving deeper and deeper into your own interior. It's the journey from the surface of who you appear to be, all the way down to who you actually are at your core. And that journey can only happen in silence. The mind, when it is constantly filled with noise, notifications, news, conversations, screens, stays at the surface level. It reacts. It processes information. It navigates the social world, but it never goes deeper than that. It's like the surface of a lake that is always choppy from the wind. When there's that much turbulence on the surface, you can't see anything below. But when the wind stops, when silence genuinely arrives, the surface settles, and the depth below begins to become visible. Neuroscience has actually caught up to what Jung described intuitively. Researchers studying the brain have identified something called the default mode network, a system that becomes active when we pull back from external tasks and go inward. And what does this network do? It processes memory, integrates emotion, searches for meaning, and builds a deeper understanding of the self. In other words, the brain has a built-in mechanism for self-knowledge, but it only activates when we are quiet enough to let it run. This is why so many profound realizations come not in the middle of a busy workday, but in the shower, on a long drive with no podcast playing, in those few minutes before sleep when the day finally lets go. The brain is not doing nothing in those moments. It is doing some of its most important work. And here's the thing about reaching that depth. Once you touch it, even briefly, the way you move through the world starts to change in ways that are hard to describe but impossible to miss. The comparisons you used to make, where you stack yourself up against other people and feel either superior or inadequate, they start to lose their grip. The judgments other people make about you stop landing as hard, not because you stop caring about people, but because you're no longer standing on the shaky foundation of other people's opinions. You're standing on something solid, something internal. And from that place, your words carry weight. Your decisions carry intention. You are no longer a leaf being carried by whatever wind happens to be blowing that day. You are a tree, roots deep, branches still moving in the breeze, but not going anywhere. And now we get to the part that sounds almost impossible until you've experienced it yourself. When you genuinely change on the inside, the outside starts to rearrange. Not because the universe is magical, although Jung had some interesting things to say about that too, but because the way you perceive, filter, and engage with reality shifts completely when your inner state shifts. And when your engagement with reality changes, the results you get from reality change too. Jung called one version of this synchronicity, the phenomenon of meaningful coincidences. The way that when a person is living in alignment with who they truly are, events begin to connect in ways that feel almost orchestrated. The right person shows up at the right time. An opportunity appears exactly when you needed it most. A door opens the moment you finally stopped forcing the one that was already closed. Now, Jung was not being mystical about this, or at least not entirely. When you are living reactively, scattered, performing, exhausted, and defensive, you miss things. You are so deep in the noise that you cannot see the signals. But when your mind finally quiets, your perception sharpens. You start noticing what was always there but previously invisible. Think about the experience of buying a new car. The moment you decide on a specific make and model, you suddenly start seeing that car everywhere, on every highway, in every parking lot. It's not that more of those cars suddenly appeared. It's that your brain, now primed to notice that thing, started pulling it out of the background and into the foreground. Your inner state primes what you notice in the world. When your inner state is chaos, you notice threats, obstacles, and friction. When your inner state is clear and centered, you start to notice possibilities, openings, and connections. This is not wishful thinking. This is attention. And attention is one of the most powerful forces a human being possesses. Here is what this actually looks like in real life. People who have done this kind of inner work, who have gotten honest with themselves, reclaimed their energy, faced their shadow, gotten quiet enough to find their depth, often describe a moment when things just start clicking. Not because they worked harder, not because they got lucky, but because they finally got out of their own way. They leave the career that was suffocating them and find that the thing they were afraid to pursue was more viable than they thought. They step away from the relationship that had run its course and discover that being alone for a while was exactly what they needed to finally understand themselves. They stop chasing approval and find that the right people, the ones who actually fit, show up naturally. None of this is painless. There is real doubt involved. There is loneliness. There is the sting of being misunderstood by people who knew the old, performing version of you. But on the other side of that discomfort is something Jung described as a life that actually belongs to you. And there is one more thing worth saying here. Because Jung was emphatic about it. You cannot fake this. You cannot post your way to authenticity. You cannot perform stillness and get the benefits of real stillness. You cannot repeat affirmations over a chaotic inner world and expect it to transform. The deeper layers of the psyche, what Jung called the unconscious, always know the truth. And it is the truth of your inner state that shapes your life, not the surface presentation. So when life feels chaotic and nothing seems to be working, the answer is almost never to push harder on the outside. The answer is almost always to go quieter on the inside, to stop, to get still, to stop explaining and defending and performing, and instead just listen to what is actually happening in your own mind. Listen for the direction that some deeper part of you has been trying to communicate, even as the noise of daily life kept drowning it out. Carl Jung believed something deeply, and his entire body of work was built around it. He believed that the most important journey a human being can take is not outward, but inward, not to distant places, but to the hidden rooms within yourself, not in search of more accomplishment, but in search of more wholeness. And the path to that journey is simpler than most people think. It does not require a meditation retreat, or a life overhaul, or a dramatic departure from everything you have built. Sometimes it begins with something as small as pausing before you react, sitting in silence for 10 minutes before you reach for your phone in the morning, writing down the thing that has been bothering you for weeks instead of continuing to push it aside. Asking yourself honestly, what am I actually feeling right now? And staying with the answer instead of running from it. These small acts of turning inward are the beginning of something much larger, because the person who learns to live from their center, who stops performing and starts actually existing, that person doesn't just feel better. They show up differently. They love better. They work better. They make clearer decisions and recover faster from setbacks. They stop being pulled around by every opinion and every fluctuation of the social weather. They become, in the truest sense of the word, themselves. Jung once described two kinds of people. Those who look only outward, forever seeking themselves in the reflection of other people's eyes, and those who dare to look inward. He said the ones who look inward are the ones who eventually wake up. And when that awakening happens, order does not come from controlling everything around you. It comes from finding the stillness within yourself. When you find that stillness, when you stop fighting for the world's attention and start giving your attention to yourself, things begin to fall into place. Not because you forced them, not because you finally said the right things or performed the right way, but because you finally came home.